Hello to all. I'm Luisa Paolotti. Let's talk about, first of all, a first introduction connected with agriculture and the concept of sustainability. We can say that agriculture, in its thousands of years of history, has been the first productive activity that always dealt with sustainability, even if initially it wasn't the concept of sustainability that we know today. And agriculture always dealt with sustainability because it has always been the only and precious source of resources necessary for the survival and development of the human population. So there is a strict difference between harvesting, simple harvesting of natural products of the earth, and agriculture. The simple harvesting of natural products depends surely from productivity, but this productivity depends on the specific needs of the plants and on the dynamics of the ecosystems. While agriculture, through human intervention, control in its favor the intrinsic and extrinsic conditions that determine production. Um, so there was generally in the past an abandonment of nomadic population patterns and the formation of permanent settlements with the introduction of agricultural practices. Over time, we can say that with the main objective of increasing the production per unit area, there was a development of several methods and procedures in which the main objective was reaching the sustainability in the sense of meeting the local community's needs. So without taking into account the consumption of the natural resources employed. And also because until a certain period, it was considered valid the principle of the capacity of natural resources, for example, water and agrarian soil, to renew themselves continuously for sustaining crops and livestock. But we can say that if we don't manage in a proper way these resources, this cannot be always valid. The word sustain comes from the Latin sustinere, that means sus, means from below, and tinere, that means to keep. And this word to sustain wants to emphasize initially the aim of agriculture in a long-term perspective of maintaining productivity and usefulness for the society. Then, always in a historic perspective, after the Second World War, there was the Green Revolution, in which large productivity gains were achieved. And the Green Revolution had the aim of transforming completely the agricultural system, in particular by means of the use of high-powered agricultural machinery, by means of the irrigation techniques, cultivation with high-yielding varieties that surely were intensive both in space and time. At the same time, with the Green Revolution, there has been a qualification of human resources, a specialization of the skills, but also a reduction in the number of employees because of an automatization of work and contemporary the development of the secondary and tertiary sectors. It means the industrial and tourism and services sectors. So we can say that this kind of production model that was mainly focused on increasing the yield and productivity, also because of the continuous population increase in the planet, had the main objective of replacing natural capital. And this happened by means of the introduction of genetically uniform varieties, high levels of inputs like irrigation, fertilizers, and pesticides use, and the replacement of natural capital happened because, for example, the use of fertilizer could substitute the soil quality, while the use of pesticide could provide an alternative to crop rotation as a means of controlling weeds. However, this type of agriculture had negative effects on the environment and on natural resources, and these are some examples of the problems that this intensive agriculture caused, like, for example, soil degradation, salinization of irrigated areas, accumulation of pest resistance factors, biodiversity erosion and deforestation, and surely also the problems of pollution, for example, connected with the emission of greenhouse gases, and, for example, with the release of nitrates into water bodies. After this preliminary introduction, now we can see what can intend for sustainability. We must say that there isn't a general consensus on the term and not a globally accepted concept. The Australian Global Sustainability Institute states that there are more than 80 definitions of sustainability given by different bodies like government agencies, corporations, and so on. The most common definition of sustainability and sustainable development was given by the Brundtland Report in 1987. And in that occasion, sustainable development was defined as the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this became the generally accepted definition of sustainable development. In this context, sustainability can be defined and described by means of three different dimensions: the economic, the social, and the environmental dimensions of sustainability. For economic sustainability, we mean the ability to generate income and employment to sustain populations. For social sustainability, we mean the ability to equally distribute this well-being and this welfare by class and gender, and also ensuring security, health, and education. The environmental sustainability is the ability to maintain quality and reproducibility of natural resources. Then we have an institutional condition that is connected with all the other three dimensions of sustainability, and that is the need to ensure conditions of stability, democracy, participation, and justice. In this context, given by the concept of sustainable development and sustainability, here we have a definition of sustainable agriculture given in 1997 from an Italian scientist. Sustainability of the agricultural systems is the ability to maintain a constant balance over time so as to satisfy the needs of future generations and of the present generation. And this constant balance is aimed to supply adequate, healthy, and wholesome food, and is aimed to live in a not degrading environment. So in this case, we have the integration of economic, social, and ecological and environmental sustainability. Also for contrasting the problems that the intensive agriculture caused to the environment. Actually, the first approach to sustainable agriculture in the 1980s proposed a way of cultivation that should mimic the natural ecosystem. Then other definitions and practices such as agroecology, integrated agriculture, that we will see in a while, were developed during the time. Another definition in 1990 from United States Department of Agriculture said that sustainable agriculture had to, in the long term, meet the human needs, increase environmental quality and natural resources, make the most efficient use of renewable resources, and integrate natural biological processes support economic vitality and increase quality of life. So considering an integrated approach to agriculture. But which are the main objectives of sustainable agriculture? Surely one objective is to improve productivity, because productivity must increase in the future for meeting the growing demand for food and agricultural products, because the population is expected to grow more and more. 8.6 billion people are expecting on the planet by 2030, and 9.8 billion people by 2050. Another objective is improving the state of natural resources, because sustainability of production depends also on the integrity of natural capital, and also because we must reduce negative impacts on the environment. And these environmental impacts can affect not only the environment itself, but also the future production. Then there is also surely an objective of reducing poverty and food insecurity, because 800 million people in the world suffer from malnutrition, and agriculture in a way that is sustainable can aim to contribute to reducing this poverty and food insecurity. The support of producers is another important aim, because nowadays there is a great agricultural instability due to weather events, pandemics, market volatility, and civil conflicts. And so there have been proper policies and technologies that must support the agricultural producers. And finally, we should also adopt effective and equitable governance for adding the public dimension to the economic enterprises systems, and for achieve a balance between accountability, fairness, and transparency. We can say that there is a big difference between the management of natural resources in a short-term perspective, in which the economic profit is the main objective, and so we just have to control the production of raw materials for distributing them for the processing industry, and the long-term management of natural resources. So a long-term management implies also the control of erosion, the management of soil and water, and quality of them, and the ecosystem services preservation that are very, very important. In the context of sustainable agriculture, some example of agroecological services and ecosystem services are the valorization of biodiversity, with carbon sequestration, the water retention, stability and resilience of the ecosystems, and also for sure the pollination functions. So we can say that in this context that sustainable agriculture is a multifunction production system, in which we have surely as objective the production of biomass for food or other uses, but then we have also touristic and recreational aspects, and then the preservation of these ecological services that are strictly important. And so these are some of the main principles of sustainable agriculture that must integrate the protection of the environment and the protection of ecosystem services, with also economic and social objectives. For example, economic remuneration, or respect for the rights of people involved in the production system and rural communities, and an harmonious development with local communities in general. Here we have some agronomic practices that can be considered as part of sustainable agriculture. For example, cultural rotations, integrated pest management and biological control, natural fertilization, minimum or no tillage at all. And we can divide the sustainable production systems in some main categories. There is the so-called integrated agriculture that combines conventional and organic farming practices. And generally, it is a production system in which we have a minimal use of technical means that could have negative impacts on the environment and consumer health. So, for example, some of the practices of integrated agriculture are crop rotation, appropriate cultivation techniques, standard and certified use of seeds, balanced fertilization practices, pest control, and so on. Then we have the organic farming that has the main aim that of avoiding at all the use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and exploiting the nutrient cycle, practicing crop rotation also in this case, increasing the organic matter to restore soil fertility. And in this way, we can have a reduction in the nitrogen losses and also an increase in the soil carbon sequestration. Another system that can be considered sustainable is biodynamic farming, even if it is an holistic method and it hasn't a proper scientific approach. And biodynamic farming has some points similar to organic farming, but it is called biodynamic because it employs biodynamic preparations that contain specific plant or mineral extracts. And then finally, we have the conservation agriculture, that it is based on a set of principles and practices that can contribute to a sustainable intensification of production. And the three basic principles of conservation agriculture are a minimal soil disturbance, a permanent organic soil cover with cover crops, and a diversification in rotation for annual crops and intercropping for perennial crops. Finally, we finish with a connection with the policy aspects because we have the Agenda 2030, that is the main international reference point for sustainable development. And it is an action plan described and proposed by United Nations for fighting hunger, poverty, and for preserving the planet. And it is based on 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And in particular, 2 of these goals are strictly connected with sustainable agriculture. The goal 2 is aimed to end hunger, achieve food security and better nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. In particular, these are some of the aspects that must be considered. The objective, one of the objectives is double the agricultural productivity and income of small-scale food producers by 2030, ensure sustainable food production systems, and implement agricultural practices that increase productivity and production, maintaining ecosystems, enhance resilience to climate change, extreme weather, droughts, floods, and other disasters, and progressively improve land and soil quality. Another target that is very important is the target 15, that is aimed to protect, restore, and promote the sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems and also a sustainable management of forests, fight desertification and land degradation. And these are some of the objectives. For example, by 2020, ensure the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of inland freshwater and terrestrial ecosystems and their services. And by 2030, ensure the conservation of mountain ecosystems, including their biodiversity, and also taking significant actions to reduce the degradation of natural habitats and biodiversity. So in general, these are 2 of the 17 goals of Agenda 2030 that is very, very strictly connected with the objective of sustainable agriculture that we mentioned, and with a proper management of agriculture in a sustainable way. Thank you very much.